Tyler, thanks for grabbing some time with me this morning.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm excited to chat a little bit about StoryBrand with you. We help so many different kinds of organizations implement the StoryBrand framework into their business. And sometimes they're really large organizations.
Yeah,
And it can be, difficult to change or to implement things that are new. So I have some questions I'd love to ask you around that.
let's do it. It sounds great.
Awesome. So we've seen StoryBrand dramatically increase conversions with businesses and organizations of all size. But how can implementing that framework really change even a multi or a many million dollar organization?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, it can be a little bit different because, if a smaller business comes to us, oftentimes we're, helping them with their homepage copy because they're still trying to figure out how to position themselves correctly and attract the right audience, attract the right customers, those types of things. And so obviously in a multi-million or a larger organization, tens, 20s, 30s, 40, $50 million company, they've already figured that out. Like they've already figured out obviously how to attract customers and all that kind of stuff. And so, they're not necessarily coming to us and saying, hey, I need a new headline for my homepage,
Right.
where some of the smaller companies do that. And so oftentimes, when we are trying to implement their framework, it's specific for something. So it oftentimes depends just what they're noticing or what they're seeing and what they're trying to accomplish with it. And so, maybe they're, in the last year, we've talked to lots of businesses about, they had a significant presence offline that they were converting on, whether it's events or different types of advertising that might no longer exist at this point, based on kind of the shutdowns and everything over the last year. And so they've had to switch to online. And so then it's, okay, do we have a sales funnel? Do we have a clear process to move someone from a visitor to a lead, to a, prospect, to a customer? And so we've been helping customers with that, where it's, defining a little bit more clarity in the messaging that goes out to each of those different kind of tracks, if you will, to kind of move people along. Or sometimes people are launching a whole new service and they're trying to figure out, hey, how can I, cut through some of the noise, maybe if there is existing, competitors or other services. And then sometimes people are bundling together a complex service. So maybe they're kind of rolling things together and try to have a better offering or a more kind of complete offering. And they're trying to figure out, hey, how do I message this? It's really complex. How do I break that down into more simplistic terms that kind of get people, where we want them to go faster than having them, requiring them to read lots of copy or something like that. So again, it depends, but those are some, I guess, examples of kind of how people have come to us, and then how the frameworks like kind of overlaid on top of those really does kind of get results and help them accomplish the goals they're really going after.
Absolutely. And one of the things I think with large organizations like that, when they're making a change in market, whether that's a product or service, region, a lot of times they're too close to it. And so then the messaging around it is just really confusing or very convoluted. And so it's so important to clear that up. But also, when you're really like part of a really large organization, it's scary to change. If you have something that's, you've been doing for a long time, maybe leadership is invested in it. But there are usually like warning signs or things you'd be like, oh, we should shift something here. What are some of those things that organizations should look for?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, one of those is exactly what you said. And oftentimes we refer to it internally as you've been drinking way too much of your own Kool-Aid for a long time. And so it can get really complex to try to change your messaging on your own if that's something you're trying to do. But as far as kind of like tripwires, if you will, or things that people notice, oftentimes it's hey, we're having a hard time accomplishing a goal, whatever that goal is, whether that's an online sales, conversion number that we talked about a little bit earlier, or it's some sort of like a metric with an email list, or it is an ad or a paid ad or something like that you're trying to achieve, and something's not working. And you need to kind of refresh it. And so oftentimes it's those types of things. It's like there's a specific reason that you're aware that, hey, maybe we should try something different, or we're aware of a different framework or something like that. When I mentioned earlier, launching new products, and I know you just said that too, but launching new products is a big deal because oftentimes if you're already established as a company, already established as, we already have product lines and sales channels and everything that are doing great, but we're now trying to introduce something new, that can be really complex because you don't want to dilute any of the other sales channels. You want to have it be a value add and potentially be able to upsell some other customers. You want it to be clear to new prospects that you're getting in front of. And so that, that's often that trigger. And then I would say alignment of internal teams has been really interesting. I would say that's not necessarily something we come out front and advertise of like, hey, align your sales and marketing teams. Some agencies do that. We haven't necessarily been one of those, but it's been interesting as we run some of these messaging workshops, as we introduce the framework, as we help people through the framework, how much, say there's maybe 10 people in the call or 15 people in the call or in the workshop, and how oftentimes different degrees of which they would tell their own story or to tell their own, sales pitch or elevator pitch, if you will, of their product or their services. And when you get, 10 different variations of it, sometimes it can get a little bit muddled and it can get a little bit muddy. And so that's been really interesting as like a byproduct of running some of these workshops, is people are misaligned. So if you notice that where it starts to get muddy and you talk to different people and they're saying different things, that can potentially be a kind of a tripwire. Attacking products. And then I just would say, again, like the complexity, if it's a company that has a really complex product, it's really important to rehash your messaging on a regular basis, because if it's really complex, then likely it's really complex to me. And you need to get me to like the place you want me to go to faster. And oftentimes that's done through, words that I'm reading and those types of things as a customer. So I don't know, did that answer your question? I feel like I read a little bit.
No, absolutely. And I think too, like when organizations that are creating like a shift in their industry or rolling out a new product, once all of the early adapters have kind of like latched on, it might be important to change your messaging a little bit too, if you're trying to go after the majority instead of just, like I said, those early adapters. So absolutely.
Totally. Yeah. And we do it internally here as we've grown over the last number of years. Our messaging and the customers we were trying to attract, 3, 4, 5 years ago is different than what it is now. And a lot of that's because we built a different team and we built different and different expertises and such over the years. And so we've had to change our messaging because we want to be attractive to different people and in different seasons of business. That happens for sure. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
But it can be really intimidating and scary to implement a shift as a larger organization. So what kind of marketing leaders do to get buy-in from like their senior leadership team, but then also their team if they're taking a new approach?
Yeah. No, that's a really good question. I mean, we've had people that come to us that are like, VPs of sales or VPs of marketing that like bring their whole team and everyone's bought in and it's great. And then we've also had others that are, maybe a marketing associate or something on the team. And it almost feels like they're doing like a little covert op, like, hey, let's try this and see if it works, which are both great. Like both of those, are awesome. And it totally depends. I would say one of the things that we would recommend, sorry for my little calendar ding there. One of the things that I would recommend is to test it. Are someone that's on the marketing team and you're really trying to or justify a change in something, come with data, come with, you've A/B tested a headline on a homepage or a landing page or a set of, an ad campaign and A/B tested different campaigns with different messaging, or you've segmented your email database and you've triggered, sent different emails to different audiences and seeing how they're performing. So really being able to come with some sort of like a more so, oh yeah, this is really cool. I read this book and I listened to some podcasts and yeah, we should change our whatever, or whatever revenue number I'm responsible for, we should change our messaging. And more so come to them and say, hey, this is where we used to be. This is where we're at now with some of these testings. And this is what we'd like to roll out kind of over the next, number of months. We want to continue testing it, make sure we're honing it in and fine tuning it. But so being able to like present that case. And then it's also important to test the different things like, I think in this day and age, people by the time they, contact a sales team, they're, 7% already decided on their sales choice or something. And most of the time that's because they've had multiple like touch points in the process, whether that's on social or reviews or websites or referral, whatever. And if you're able to even remove one of those touch points, that's a really big deal in a lot of organizations. And so if you can clarify your message in a way that you move people like down if you look at your sales process like a game board, if you can jump people 5 spaces forward, That's a huge deal from like a timing side of things. It's a
Mm-hmm.
huge deal from a revenue side of things. And so just coming with that, with those, like that data story, if you will, of why it kind of justifying the reason of a change. Sometimes that can be helpful. One, in confidence, just if you're a VP and you're trying to shift a company message, you can be more confident if you've got that data. And then two, if you're trying to pitch that to a larger team, having that data story is really important too. So does that make
100%.
sense? Kind of?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, that actually rolls really well into the next question. What are some areas that would be good to beta test a StoryBrand framework in?
Great question. Yeah, I mentioned a couple earlier. You know, A/B testing headlines is cool oftentimes because it's pretty easy to do. Sometimes you can ABC test something. There's different softwares you can use that in and set that up. And whether it's just like a tagline that's the first thing people look at, or A/B testing like an entire landing page. Like, so maybe it's you're doing some PPC ads or something like that, and you're driving traffic to something. We'll test different messages or even different layouts, different, you know, hey, here's your sales process that's really simplistic. Here it is more complex, and just testing to see which one's working. And so paid ads, I've mentioned email campaigns. Those are big. I would say sometimes what's interesting to try as well is kind of come up with different, I guess, kind of sound bites or stories that you can insert into the sales process and work with different members on the sales team that might be interested in kind of being a test case and just seeing like, hey, can you run every other call you're on? Can you try this talk track versus this one? And just really seeing like that differentiator and testing it, just because oftentimes those are like real results quickly because you're talking to someone versus waiting for a digital click or waiting for a sign up or waiting for whatever. And so testing them through the sales process can be really cool. But I just would highly recommend like small segments. And so if you've got a large database, that's great. If you've got a mobile app and you want to roll it out to different users, that's cool. I mean, I think there's lots of different ways to do it, but testing it with smaller segments before you just go, hey, let's just, you know, pull the plug and have everybody, you know, see the new colors and the new message right away. Some brands can afford to do that, and that's awesome. And they know their audience so well that it's great. But there's other brands that it's a risk. And so having like those different smaller segments that you're really testing and refining, knowing that, you know, maybe your V1 might not be as good as your, you know, V6 or something, and trying to kind of go through that process. So that's what I recommend at this point with larger organizations.
I feel like I heard you say so many times, basically, to have a data story, like be able to back it up with numbers. And I mean, 100%. That's so important, you know, to justify change and to make a big shift like that.
Yeah,
so for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your insight on this. It was great talking to you.
For sure. We'll talk later. See ya.
Bye.